Nearby,
普
President,
京总统先生，
my old dear friend.
我的老朋友，很高兴
I am
在中
delighted
国
to
农历
hold
新
this
年
virtual
即
meeting
将
with
到来
you
之
as the
际，
Chinese Lunar Year approaches.
同总统先生举行视频会晤。
At this year's
岁末
return,
年初
it is
是
time to take
盘
stock
点
of the
收获，
harvest and plan for a new
谋
chapter.
划新
This
篇的
year
时
marks
刻。
the 80th
今年
anniversary
是
of
中国人民
victories
抗
of
日
the
战
Chinese
争、
people's war of
苏联
resistance
伟大
against
卫国战
Japanese
争
aggression, the
及
Soviet
世界
Union's
反
Great
法西斯
Patriotic
战争
War
胜
and the
利
World
80周年，
Anti-Fascist War,
也是
founding
联
of the
合国
United
成立80
Nations,
周年。
UN.
中
China
俄
and Russia should take this
两
as
国
an
要以
opportunity
此
to
为
defend
契
the
机，共同
UN-centered
捍卫以
international
联合国
system,
为核心的
jointly
国际体系，
safeguarding the outcomes of the victory of World
捍
War
卫
II,
用鲜血和
which
生
were
命换
acquired
来
with
的
blood
第二
and
次世界
lives,
大战
and
胜利成
safeguarding
果，
the
维护两
institutional
国作为
rights
联
of the
合
two
国
countries
创
as
始
founding
会员
members
国
of the
和安理
United
会
Nations
常任理事
and
国的
permanent
制
members
度
of the
性
Security
权利。
Council. In the
新
new
的一
year,
年，我愿同
I
总
am
统
willing to
先生
work
一
with
道，
you, Mr. President, to
继续
continue
引
guiding
领
China-Russia
中俄关
relations
系登高
toward
望
greater
远，
heights,
以
to cope
中俄
with
关系的
uncertainties
稳
of the
定性和
external
坚韧性，
environment,
应
with the
对外部
stability and
环境的不
resilience
确
of
定性，
China-Russia relations,
共同
jointly
促进
promote the
两国发展
development and
振兴，
revitalization of the
维
two
护
countries, and
国
uphold
际公
international
平正
fairness
义。
and justice.
Honorable President Xi Jinping, my dear friend, I agree with your perspective. Russia-China cooperation is built on a broad alignment of national interests, and our views on how to properly manage major power relations are increasingly aligned. Our bilateral relationship is founded on friendship, mutual trust and support, and equality and mutual benefit. Russia-China relations possess a high degree of independence and are unaffected by domestic political factors or the current international situation.
All right, so you wanted to really get what was going on with that Putin and Xi video call right after Trump's inauguration in 2025. Well, we got the video clips, transcripts, expert analysis from all over the world. So, yeah, get ready for some serious geopolitical intrigue.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Like, just hours after Trump is sworn in, promising a tougher stance on China and Russia, we see this very public display of unity between Putin and Xi, almost like they're sending a message, don't you think? Especially with Trump aiming to, negotiate peace in Ukraine.
Yeah, and it's not just like a dry formal meeting, they're
Yeah.
calling each other dear friends,
Yeah.
talking about mutual trust, shared interests. Do you think that personal touch really makes a difference on, the world stage?
Oh, it absolutely does. Remember, just days before Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, they declared this no-limits partnership. This call shows that despite the war and all the pressure from the West, this partnership is only getting stronger. And the timing. Right after Trump's inauguration, that's not a coincidence. They want to show the world, and especially the new U.S. administration, that they're a united front.
A united front? What does that even mean? What are they actually trying to achieve together?
Well, they're pushing for what they call a multipolar world order. Basically a world where power isn't concentrated in just the West, especially the U.S. They want a system where multiple power centers, including themselves, obviously, have a greater say in global affairs. Think of it like instead of one superpower calling all the shots, you have several major players at the table, each with their own sphere of influence.
Okay, so it's a power shift. But why now? Why is this happening as a new U.S. president takes office?
Well, because the global landscape is changing so much right now. You have the war in Ukraine, tensions between the U.S. and China, and a new U.S. president whose foreign policy is, well, let's just say unpredictable. This creates an opportunity for Russia and China to try to reshape the world order in a way that, better suits them.
So they're seizing the moment. But how does this no-limits partnership actually play out in practice? We know China's Russia's biggest trading partner, especially for oil. But what else is going on?
Well, just look at the numbers. Bilateral trade between them hit $245 billion last year. And a lot of that is China buying Russian oil and gas. This basically gives Russia a lifeline when it comes to those Western sanctions. China's buying the energy that Europe won't, which keeps money flowing into Russia.
And Putin even mentioned collaborating on nuclear technology, right? That's not just buying and selling oil, it's like building long-term ties.
Exactly. They're cooperating on everything from energy to infrastructure to military technology. And for Russia, that ally label that Putin used for China, that's significant. Russia doesn't use that word lightly. It implies a level of trust and commitment that goes way beyond just, shared interests.
So they're presenting this united front. But are there any cracks in this alliance? Every partnership has its challenges, right?
Of course. One potential issue is the power imbalance. China's economy is massive compared to Russia's. So while Russia benefits economically from China's support, there's a risk of them becoming too dependent, giving China more leverage.
That makes sense. But wouldn't China also be taking a risk by aligning so closely with Russia, especially with all the instability in the world right now?
Absolutely. For China, one risk is that they might face consequences from the West. Their support for Russia could hurt their relationships with other important economic partners, maybe even lead to more sanctions or trade restrictions. They're walking a tightrope trying to advance their interests without, provoking too much opposition.
It's like a high-stakes game of chess, each move having ripple effects across the board. But with all this talk of power and strategy, I keep thinking about Xi Jinping's references to history. He mentioned the 80th anniversaries of World War II victories and the founding of the UN. Why bring that up now?
That's a great question. I think it's key to understanding their strategy. It's not just about remembering the past. It's strategic messaging.
So it's more than just remembering the past. It's about using history to shape the present and the future.
Precisely. By invoking these events, Xi is subtly reminding the world that China and Russia were on the winning side of major global conflicts, and that they were founding members of the UN. It's a way of legitimizing their ambitions and presenting themselves as responsible global actors, even as they challenge the existing world order. They're essentially saying, we're not outsiders trying to tear down the system. We helped build it, and now we're here to reshape it.
So it's all about framing the narrative, controlling the message. They want to define their role in this new global landscape. But what does that mean for, the listener? For you and me, for people trying to understand this complex world?
It means understanding that we're living through a period of major change. The balance of power is shifting, alliances are evolving, and the rules of the game are being rewritten. And that's why it's so important to pay attention to events like this video call. It gives us a look into the motivations, the strategies, and the potential consequences of this power shift.
Okay, so we've got this no limits partnership, a push for a multipolar world and strategic messaging rooted in history. But let's get specific. She talked about safeguarding the hard-won outcomes of World War II. What does that even mean, in today's world? And what does it mean for global stability? We need to unpack that, and I think it's a great place to pick up when we come back.
Yeah, when she talks about safeguarding those hard-won outcomes of World War II, it's tricky. On the one hand, he's talking about the UN and a rules-based international order, which has been really good for China.
Right, because China needs stability to keep growing its economy and its global influence.
Exactly. But at the same time, he's also challenging the dominance of the U.S. and its allies, which was also kind of solidified by World War II. It's like they want the benefits of the system, but they also want to change it to give them more power.
So it's a balancing act. They want to have their cake and eat it too. How do they reconcile those, contradictory goals?
Well, that's the big question. One way they're doing it is by emphasizing certain parts of World War II history. They focus on their victory against fascism, portraying themselves as defenders of peace and stability.
But they downplay the fact that the U.S. was a key ally in that fight.
Exactly. They frame the narrative to fit their goals. And this historical messaging is really powerful for their own people at home, reinforcing national pride, justifying their actions on the world stage.
So it's a strategic use of history to make themselves look legit, both at home and abroad. But let's go back to those hard-won outcomes she mentioned. What are they specifically trying to protect? And how does that connect to their idea of a multipolar world? Well, one thing they're focused on is maintaining their own territory and sovereignty. They see any challenge to their borders or their internal affairs as a threat, and they're ready to use force to defend their interests, as we've seen with Russia and Ukraine.
So for them, the rules-based order means everyone respects their red lines.
Exactly. But they're also pushing for changes to the global economic and financial system, which they see as controlled by the U.S. dollar and Western institutions. They want a system that's more multipolar with more representation for emerging economies.
And they've been taking steps in that direction, right? Creating new financial institutions and using their own currencies in international trade.
Yeah, exactly. Think about things like the BRICS Bank, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and even digital currencies like China's digital yuan. These are all ways they're trying to create a system that's less reliant on the West.
So it's not just talk, they're actually doing stuff.
Yeah.
But how do they see the U.S. fitting into this multipolar world? Are they trying to replace the U.S. or coexist with it? That's a tough one. I think their vision is still developing. They definitely see the U.S. as a rival, and they're challenging its influence in different places. But at the same time, they know they need to work together on things like climate change, pandemics, and nuclear weapons.
So it's a mix of competition and cooperation.
Exactly. It's complicated. There are times when their goals align with the U.S. and times when they clash. Figuring out this relationship is going to be a challenge for everyone involved, especially with the unpredictable Trump administration.
Right, because Trump has his own ideas about how the world should work, and he's not afraid to shake things up. So how does his America First agenda fit into all of this?
Well, Trump's all about putting the U.S. first, even if it means going against allies or breaking international norms. He's skeptical of things like the UN and NATO, and he prefers to use tariffs and sanctions to pressure other countries.
And he's been tough on China, right? Starting trade wars and accusing them of unfair practices.
Exactly. And he's also taken a more aggressive approach with Russia, imposing sanctions and sending more troops to Eastern Europe.
So he's basically thrown a wrench into everything. How have China and Russia responded to this?
They've just gotten closer. They see Trump's actions as proof that the U.S. is getting weaker and trying to hold on to its power. And they're using this to their advantage, making themselves look like a more stable alternative to the West.
So they're using Trump to further their own story, painting the U.S. as the bad guy and themselves as the ones trying to keep things stable.
Exactly. They're presenting themselves as the champions of a fairer world order, one that's less dominated by the West. And they're reaching out to countries that are unhappy with the current system, offering them a different model.
It's like a battle of ideas on the world stage.
Yeah.
But beyond the talk, what are they actually doing? We talked about the economic stuff, but what about the military?
Yeah, that's another area where they're getting closer. They've been doing military exercises together, sharing intelligence, even working together to develop new weapons.
And that's especially worrying with the war in Ukraine, right? Because it makes you wonder if China might actually give weapons to Russia, which would be a huge escalation.
Absolutely. The U.S. has made it clear that's a line they shouldn't cross. But so far, China's been careful, at least publicly. They're helping Russia with money and diplomacy, but they haven't given them weapons directly.
So they're playing a risky game, trying to support their ally without starting a fight with the West.
Exactly. They're walking a tightrope.
Yep.
And it's a situation that needs to be watched very carefully, because any mistake could have serious consequences.
Okay, we've talked about a lot. The history, the economy, the military, the U.S., and the potential risks. But let's bring it back to the listener. What does this all mean for someone trying to understand the world today?
It means understanding that the world is changing. Old alliances and power structures are being challenged. The world is becoming more complex with no single country in charge. And there's potential for both cooperation and conflict as these different visions of the future play out.
So it's about being informed, being engaged, and being ready for anything.
Exactly. And it's about realizing that even small things like a video call between two leaders can have huge consequences.
And speaking of small things, there's one detail from this call that I can't stop thinking about. It's subtle, but I think it says a lot about the Russia-China partnership.
I'm curious. Tell me more.
You know how they kept saying, dear friend, Putin and Xi? It seemed like more than just being polite, like there was a real warmth, almost like they were buddies.
It is interesting how personal relationships can influence geopolitics. You know, in international relations, you always hear about realpolitik.
Yeah.
The idea that countries only act based on their own interests. But personal connections, shared experiences, even just respect, can really shape how leaders interact and the decisions they make.
So it's not just like a game of chess, there's a human element, too.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's especially true here. Putin and Xi have known each other for a long time. They've met so many times, both formally and informally, and they've developed a rapport, a level of trust that goes beyond just diplomacy.
And that personal connection could be why they're willing to take this on together, to push for this new world order.
I think so. They seem to genuinely believe in this vision of a multipolar world. And they see each other as crucial partners in making it happen. It's like they have this bond, this sense of shared purpose that's bigger than just their own country's interests.
And that shared purpose isn't just about challenging the West. It's about reshaping the world in a way that they think is more fair, especially for countries that have been left out.
Exactly. They see the current system as biased towards the West. And they're pushing for a system that gives more power to emerging economies. They want a world where power is more balanced, and where decisions are made through discussion and agreement, not just by one superpower.
But isn't there a risk that this could lead to more instability and conflict? If you have all these different countries competing for power, wouldn't that make things more likely to clash?
It's definitely possible, and it's something that people are worried about. The shift to a multipolar world probably won't be easy or peaceful. There will be problems along the way, and there's a chance for mistakes and unintended consequences.
So it's not a guaranteed path to a better world. It's more like exploring the unknown with both good and bad things possible.
Exactly. And it's going to take careful diplomacy, strategic thinking, and a willingness to compromise and cooperate. But I think it's worth trying, because the alternative, a world where one superpower controls everything, is ultimately not sustainable or fair.
So we're at this turning point in history where the old way is changing into something new, and we don't know how it's going to end up. It's both exciting and a little scary.
It is. But that's what makes geopolitics so interesting. We're watching history unfold. And hopefully by understanding what's happening, we can help create a future that's more peaceful, just, and equitable for everyone.
That's a good point. And I think it's a good place to wrap things up. We've talked about a lot in this deep dive, the motivations, the strategies, and the potential outcomes of this Russia-China partnership. We've looked at their vision of a multipolar world and the challenges they face. We've talked about global stability and what role the U.S. plays.
And hopefully our listener now understands these complex issues better and the forces that are shaping the world.
Right. But the conversation doesn't stop here. We hope you'll keep learning about these topics, stay informed, and talk to others about the future of our world. Because as we've seen today, even small things can have big consequences. And the choices we make will shape history.
Well said. Until next time, keep diving deep.
That's it for our deep dive this week. See you next time.